Yi-san, by nature, is a gloomy character. He's just kind of moody and silent all the time. One could say he's drowning in negative emotions. Or rather, sinking in them. See what I did there? Yeah, Yi-san has a lot of sinking identities. 4 to be precise. His base identity, Diechi, Spicebush, and the newly released Solemn Lament. The first two are kind of just horrible, so we're left with a choice between the two frontrunners, Spicebush and Solemn Lament. Ever since the reveal of Solemn Lament's abilities, players all over the world wondered if he would dethrone Spicebush as the funniest thinking identity. And today I am here to answer this question in a way that will hopefully satisfy you. Last video I compared ratios in 3 categories. Today I am going to do the exact same thing, however the categories will be different. You see, when comparing two skill bruiser identities, I decided to focus the comparison on power, value and versatility. But the two Yi-san identities are very different from that, as they're fighting for one specific slot in one team. This means that versatility is no longer a factor. On top of that, both identities focus on inflicting debuffs over dealing damage. Well, they still deal huge damage, but not in a direct way, which is why power is also not important to them. And just like this, we're left with only value. To make this comparison more interesting, I will split up value into 3 subcategories: potential, speed and consistency. Our Yi-sangs will be judged on these 3 categories in this video. But before we start, I once again have to tell you that 93% of my viewers aren't subscribed. This number was closer to 94% last video, so I'm grateful to all of you who decided to support me. And if you want to join this fairly small club, all you need to do is scroll down and press one button. Subscribing helps me more than you might think, and all it takes is 1 second of your time. And now, let's go back to the video. We'll start the comparison from our first category, potential. For the sake of this video, the potential of an identity is defined as the amount of value their effects can provide in the best scenario. We'll start off with Spicebush, and his unique effect of Sinking Deluge. Deluge is not only a word that no one has said in the last decade, but also a powerful effect that allows Spicebush Yi-san to deal a huge amount of damage in one strike. If you forgot the details of how the effect works, let me quickly remind you. Deluge deals damage equal to sinking potency times sinking count. That damage is first applied to the enemy's SP, if they have that, and the rest is dealt as gloom damage. What this effectively does is shift the damage dealt by sinking from later to now. This can help shave off multiple turns off of boss fights, which in turn helps you entirely ignore difficult or slow parts of a boss encounter. However, if Deluge was on its own, Spicebush Yi-san wouldn't be as strong as he is. Another effect of his third skill is converting 10 tremor count on Yi-san into 40% more damage from the skill. This includes the damage from Deluge. Effectively, this means that Yi-san increases the damage of sinking by 40%, while also inflicting it in a much more effective way. The percent increase starts to really shine once your sinking gets into really high amounts, so the potential of Spicebush Yi-san is crazy. In the absolute best case scenario, Spicebush Yi-san can deal over 27,000 damage in one hit against a Gloom Fatal enemy with 99 sinking potency and 99 count. This number is insanely high, but also pretty arbitrary. I mean, inflicting that much sinking on an enemy is already pretty impossible, but Gloom Fatal enemies are also few and far between. Not to mention that no enemy in the game has even close to enough HP for this attack to be necessary against them. Anyhow, inflicting 1 to 2000 damage with the skill is pretty easy if you try it, and is still an insane amount of damage. If we're looking at over 20 sinking count on the enemy, Deluge can pretty much speed up your victory by 2 or 3 turns, which is pretty good. As we get higher into the numbers, the increase in speed becomes even more noticeable. But as I've said before, you're not making it to those numbers in normal fights. Now that we're familiar with what Spicebush can do, let's move on to Solemn Lament. His unique effect is Butterfly, and is divided into 2 parts, the Living and the Departed, which act as potency and count. By the way, this is an insane amount of text for an effect, and I doubt a single Project Moon fan has read this description till the end, So let's go over what Butterfly does together. First of all, it caps out at 15 and doesn't expire until both the living and the departed are equal to 0. When hitting an enemy with Butterfly, the attacker heals 1 SP for every 4 stacks of the living on the enemy. The minimum is 1, so you will always heal at least a little bit of SP. When hitting an enemy under 0 SP, you deal additional damage equal to sinking potency on the enemy divided by 5 for every stack of the departed inflicted on them. What this effectively does is allow you to deal sinking damage to the enemy's body once you've inflicted 5 stacks of the departed. You can go further than the amount of sinking on the enemy, but the damage caps out at 30, limiting the potential of this effect. The damage is also halved against enemies with no SP, making it more difficult to reach the 30 damage cap. At the end of the turn, all stacks of the departed disappear, and all stacks of the living inflict sinking equal to the living and then convert into the departed. If you have been listening closely, you could figure out by now that Butterfly is not that strong of an effect. A large portion of the player base loves to overestimate its power, but in reality, the high number of limiters holds Butterfly back from being a real rival to Deluge. Still, I'm not calling the effect bad in any way. In fact, I think it's good, but it's not great or amazing, just good. If we consider that Yi-Sang gained exactly 70% of his ammo as the departed on reload, as is said in his passive, and went first in a turn with his skills 3, he will inflict the enemy with 14 stacks of the departed, which will likely allow Butterfly's damage to reach its cap of 30, and if we say that the remaining characters hit 10 to 15 coins, the damage dealt by this effect in one turn will be somewhere between 300 and 450. This is a great amount of free damage, but it's nowhere near the 1 to 2000 damage from Deluge. In terms of potential, Spicebush takes the cake. I mean, Bloodsteep Sand can pull off damage that no other skill in the game can come close to, so it's not surprising that when we talk about theoretical numbers, he comes out on top. Next up, let's move to the second category, speed. In this video, the speed of an identity is defined as the amount of turns of extra setup needed for the identity to function at its best. What I mean by extra setup is using skills that you normally wouldn't, simply because they set up the identity in question better than skills that you would normally use for more damage or effects instead. We'll start with Spicebush once again. His speed of setup is notoriously slow. In fact, oftentimes you should opt to defend with half your team just to keep up sinking count for a better Deluge. As I said before, the percentage increase from Bloodsteep Sand becomes more effective with higher amounts of sinking. This makes the most effective way of setting up Deluge just defending with anyone who can't go positive in sinking count during a turn. This isn't necessarily counterproductive, considering that some sinking identities, including Spicebush, have good defensive skills, but it still wastes some time. When fighting human bosses, you actually don't waste time, as you wouldn't have dealt any damage with sinking anyways, so the payoff from Deluge increases by a lot in such cases. Still, it takes a while to set up, and some of the frontrunner teams in terms of damage can simply kill the enemy before Spicebush gets his full setup. On the other hand, we have Solemn Lament. His value comes from his third skill, and his effect. In a way, he does not need any setup because he is the setup. You don't need to wait for him to come online. In fact, I believe that if you manage to get his skill 3 on the first turn, with him going first, that's already a fantastic start to an encounter. You won't be able to make use of the damage and punch of Butterfly, but the SP healing will help you kickstart the encounter in your favor. Due to how close to neutral he is in terms of sinking count, and with the fact that Butterfly only cares about the sinking potency inflicted on the enemy, you really don't have to jump through any hoops to set up the perfect Butterfly damage turn. As long as you have hit 1 or 2 Rhyme Shanks before you get to Yi-Sang's skill 3, you're going to have enough count to comfortably get this 300 to 400 damage out fairly early. This means that you don't waste any damage while getting ready for Solemn Lament's main effect. And you also get to entirely out-damage Spicebush when fighting enemies below around 1000 to 1500 health. With this, the speed category goes to Solemn Lament. He requires virtually no more setup than just playing a sinking team well, and compared to the mental gymnastics of making Spicebush work, you're going to find yourself dealing with most enemies in the game a lot quicker than if you decided to go with Spicebush. Last but certainly not least, we have consistency. For the sake of this video, consistency is defined as the amount of variables that can derail the performance of the identity. The less variables, the better. Once more, we'll start with Spicebush. The variables that need to be accounted for in order to get the maximum value from syncing deluge are syncing potency, syncing count, tremor count on Yi-Sang, the enemy's remaining HP, and, ideally, speed. Syncing is self-explanatory. The entire effect of deluge lies in multiplying syncing potency by syncing count. Having both be high numbers results in more damage. Keeping up potency is easy enough. All syncing identities can inflict a lot of it with their skills. Keeping up count is a bit more tricky. The best tool for this job is Rodian's Rhymeshank, and to increase its usability early into encounter you will have to luck out on enemy skills. Tremor count on Yi-Sang can be increased with his first skill. You also need to make sure not to waste it on his second skill by swapping it for an evade. Bloodsteep Scent can also be used to increase tremor count, but beyond the second turn, that means wasting a lot of syncing that should go into the deluge. The enemy's HP is also a factor in Spicebush Yi-Sang's effectiveness. Sure, a deluge can deal 4000 damage, but if the enemy had 200 health by the time you finish setting up, you not only dealt just 200 effective damage, but probably wasted turns on setup, which could have been used to end the fight a turn early. This means that the amount of targets Spicebush can be used on effectively is drastically cut down. The last variable is speed. This one isn't exactly necessary, but Yi-Sang going last maximizes the value of a turn by allowing you to inflict a little bit more syncing right before proccing deluge. This is especially true if you have something like a corroded Rhymeshank ready to go, and if Yi-Sang is faster than Rodia, you will either have to waste another turn or use deluge in a less effective way. This might not apply if on the turn you're using deluge you don't have any good skills available, which is why it's the least important variable. Now we move on to Solemn Lament's consistency. His main variables are syncing potency and speed. Yeah, that's it. I mean, at this point you can already guess who wins the category, but let me still explain it to you. Unlike Spicebush, Solemn Lament does not care about syncing count as much. In fact, this Yi-Sang is almost count neutral, and his unique effect does not care about syncing count at all. This means that for him, count is no more important than to any normal syncing team, so you're not forced to play for maximum count, and can hover around 3 to 5 count forever with no drawback. Syncing potency on the other hand becomes a lot more important. However, Butterfly helps in inflicting exactly that, so Yi-Sang pretty much covers his own needs here. Potency is also infinitely easier to stack than count, so it usually isn't an issue to begin with. His other main variable is speed. Unlike Spicebush, he actually really cares about going first, as at more than 0 SP, most of his bullets are the departed, and that skill only has an effect on the turn it's inflicted, meaning Yi-Sang has to go first to get the most out of Butterfly. With a maximum speed of 8, this identity can outspeed others without too much trouble, and with a lot of syncing identities in the 4 to 6 speed range, rolling a 7 will also usually get him into the first spot. But even in the unluckiest of scenarios, you can rely on the 2 haste he gains after reloading if there was a 3 skill Gloom Resonance during the turn. Going first with the haste active isn't going to happen 100% of the time, but it's pretty dang close to that, so he's got his bases covered there. To no one's surprise, Solemn Lament takes consistency. When you put him on a team, you get exactly what you expect. All the while, some people actively avoided Spicebush even before the release of Solemn Lament, as it's too inconsistent to yield better results than other identities a lot of the time. This means that with a score of 2 to 1, Solemn Lament beats Spicebush in the competition as the best syncing Yi-Sang. And that's about it. Thank you so much for watching till the end of the video, and if you want to see more of this type of content, leave a like and consider subscribing. This was Ultranum, and I hope to see you soon. Goodbye!